All right, let's go ahead and merge these down. So like I said before, there are separate subtools. We hold down Alt, we can tap through all these separate subtools. So we have our original working file way up here at the top. Its visibility is turned off, the eyeball's turned off. So we have our head and our body and our arms. So I'm going to go ahead and merge these back down again. So with the top one selected, you can do merge down and just hit merge down a couple more times, and we merged all these together. And we still maintain our Dynamesh settings. So if we go ahead and control drag, that'll just Dynamesh everything together. And then we can go back through here and do any little last minute cleanup. And this little hole in here, I'm going to take the inflate brush and just inflate that back a little bit, and then control drag to re-Dynamesh those areas here. So any last little bit of cleanup you see, maybe we'll go in here with the Damien standard brush and just make her neck a little bit more defined. Again, it's going to be in the shadows and stuff, so I'm not overly concerned. And then if we want to add surface noise back to those one areas, we can do our surface noise trick that I showed you earlier, where if we go to surface noise and then add noise where I want and apply that geometry in the unmasked areas, we can do that. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and retopologize and reproject this thing. Actually, you know what? I'm going to clean this up just a little bit in here at Damien Standard. There we go. All right, looks pretty decent. When we Dynamesh this thing together, it kept our polygroups here. So the bottom polygroup here, if we didn't want that, we can hold that Control Shift and tap it. Let's go ahead and switch back to our select rectangle. Tap that bottom polygroup, and then I'll isolate it, and then we can go ahead and do a delete hidden. And the reason I'm going to do that, and that was geometry modify topology delete hidden. And the reason I'm going to do that, oops, hold on. When I isolated this polygroup, you're going to see, if I go hold down Control Shift and drag, it actually has a little bit of a polygroup up here. So let's go ahead and do with these ones showing. These verts aren't touching. So if I go down to polygroups auto groups, that'll go ahead and assign any non-vert welded objects. Let's turn off line. Their own polygroup. So now if I go back here and then hold down Control Shift, it'll just select this bottom piece, Control Shift drag to invert that, and now I can do a geometry modify topology delete hidden. And the reason I might want to do that is if I don't need this geometry down here, when I ZRemesh this, it'll go ahead and just leave that hole open, and I'll be good to go. Now before we ZRemesh this, since it's going to replace this mesh completely, what I'm going to do is duplicate this off. So now what we're going to do is ZRemesh this, we're going to project the detail back that we have here, and then we're going to go back up here with a Z-project brush and get that full detail back on our object. Now the reason I'm not going to do project all back to this one is because I have some nasty geometry in here that I don't want to project back to. Now I could have gotten fancy with this one and been like, okay, these polygroups in here, I can keep them masked and then project back out, but I think it'll just be a little bit easier to go in manually and get that detail back with the Z-project brush. But your mileage may vary. I'll let you figure out what's the best workflow for you. So with this duplicate here, we can go ahead and ZRemesh this object. And by ZRemesh, I just mean it's going to give us new topology, nice quads that will be much lower resolution that we can UV, and then we'll subdivide and project our detail back. So in order to do that, again, we duplicate this off because ZRemesh is going to replace this geometry. We're going to go down here to Geometry, ZRemesher. Also, make sure, for whatever reason, you probably don't, but Transform, Activate Symmetry, that should be off. If you hit X on your keyboard, that toggles that on. Just make sure Activate Symmetry is off because this object obviously is not symmetrical. And then we're going to go over here, the target polygon count. Let's bump that up to like, say, 20K. We'll hit 20 and hit Enter. Adaptive size, we can, the lower we keep this, the more we'll get equally sized quads, but we're going to lose these edge transitions. It's not going to put a whole lot of detail in here. It's just going to cover it in a blanket of quads. The higher you put this, the more it's going to build in more edges as your surfaces change, like around corners and stuff. So, I mean, 50 is probably fine. I'm going to dump it down a little bit to say 25. I'm not going to keep groups or anything. Polygroups don't really matter to me anymore at this point. So now I'm just going to go ahead and hit ZRemesh. Alrighty, now that that's done, let's go ahead and take a look at it. I'm going to tap Solo, turn that on, turn on polyframing to see. Here's my new topology here. Now, again, we did lose a lot of resolution, but we're going to go ahead and get that detail back. This is just going to be our low res, kind of our game res mesh that we can bake our high res details back onto. If you like what you see, you're going to see our polygon points is set at 20. I think that's probably, no, okay, it says 20,000 polys. If you want to go even lower, what we can do is, if I turn off solo mode, you're going to see we have our original Dynamesh high-ish res sitting there visible, and then our low-res mesh here. So if we go down here to project all, you can hit project all, and you're going to see it's going to project out those verts to snap to this mesh here. If you want to make this even lower, And the reason I did projectile is because as I keep making this lower from this mesh, it's going to kind of average those vertices. So do a projectile first, and then go down here to geometry ZRemesh, and instead of saying adaptive size 25, you can hit half, and now we can ZRemesh this already low res one down even further. Now you can dial in the number, or like I said, you can hit half, and that'll just cut the polygons in half and then ZRemesh it. And here you can see it's even lower. Now, depending on how low you want to go is up to you, and kind of up to the resources of, if you're going to put this in an engine and how big it is. You can, in fact, you can manually retopologize this if you want to make it really super low res. But I think this will be fine. So if I go out of solo mode, you're going to see, again, both of these eyeballs are turned on. If I turn on solo mode, it's fine. As long as the eyeball is on for our previous high res and we project all, it'll project back and get that detail back. So I think we're in good shape here. And you know what? I think that resolution is perfect for what our needs are. So let's go ahead and project that detail back fully. And what that means is, again, if I go into solo mode here, again, we have our original Dynamesh here. Here's our original file. Here's our Dynamesh file that we cleaned up, and then here's our working Z modeler, our ZRemesh file. What I'm going to do is have both of these visible, and then this one selected, the one I want to project detail onto from the other objects visible. So I'm going to hit Control D, and that's what that's doing is basically a geometry divide. So it just subdivided my mesh, so I got more polygons, and now I have subdivision history here. So I hit Control D once, and now I'm going to hit Project All. And that's going to project detail back. Now, when I have solo mode on, when I go back and forth between here, you're going to see, okay, I'm starting to see detail come back, but I'm missing a little bit of that high frequency detail. So we're going to hit Control D again, and then project all. And then you can hit Control D again, and then hit project all. And you're going to see when we switch back and forth between these, there's hardly any difference at all. This ZRemesh one, the borders cleaned up a little bit because ZRemesh, as we went down in poly count, it kind of smoothed that edge a little bit. So that's a little bit of a difference, but the details itself in the object are the exact same. So now at this point, we don't even really need this Dynamesh version anymore. So we can go ahead and delete that. And now we just have our original super high res one from our original scan data, and then this working file here with our new cleaned up geometry and our subdivision history, so we can go back down to subdivision level 1 and get our low res mesh. And then here's our Dynamesh res mesh that we were working with. Now just a few more things we need to do. While we're at this resolution, it might be a good time to go ahead and go back to our surface, hit surface noise, and you're going to see, let's see if we can find a flatter place. We know we didn't have any surface noise like on the inside of our arm here. So if I go through here and I crank up that noise scale and I change the strength so it pumps out just a little bit here, that'll add that surface noise. And I think that surface noise is probably fine. Hit OK. That applies surface noise to our entire object, which is what we don't necessarily want. So we can hold down Control and tap, and that'll mask our object. And now when we hold down Control Alt and paint, that'll introduce surface noise in areas where we didn't really have surface noise. Of course, you can use, like we talked about earlier, surface noise built into brushes. It's kind of up to you. But any areas that are obviously just need some of that surface noise, you can add that back in. It's not really bothering me that much. This is probably just a kind of a wasted step, but just for fun or just to talk about it, we'll go ahead and cover it. So let's say we want surface noise in those unmasked areas here. Let's add a little bit more back in here too. So go ahead and unmask these areas. If we want to blur this mask a little bit, we can Control Tap and blur that mask. And then we can go down here and we can do Apply to Mesh, and that will apply surface noise in those unmasked areas. Another thing you can try is do Mask by Noise, and that'll just apply a mask. And now you can go through, say, your deformation and go to Inflate, and you can inflate through that mask how much noise you want to apply. So you can have a little bit more control as to how much noise it's adding.